All right, good afternoon, learners. It's just about 2 o'clock on this, yes, where are we now? Wednesday afternoon. This is grade 11 IT, and my name is Mr. Freeman. And we're going to carry on with the next topic that we started yesterday, the user-defined methods. And today we're going to look a little bit deeper, and we're going to expand on what we ended up yesterday with making procedures without parameters. And today we're going to expand that and make procedures with parameters. So just to recap from yesterday, what we do, we defined and described user-defined methods, those methods that you create yourself because Delphi didn't think of making them. So you now need to do it yourself. We looked at reasons why we want to use methods. There's quite a few reasons there. It makes our code nice and clean. It makes our program modular. It's easy to update. A whole lot of different reasons why we want to do that. We then went on and looked at the different types of methods, which is functions and procedures, and we differentiated between the two. The basic idea is both do a certain task, but a function has the added part where it returns a single answer of a single type at the end. Then we learned the structure of a simple procedure without a parameter, where we declared it in private, that private section yesterday, as well as the definition in the body of your code. We used procedures to solve problems in Delphi. Yes, absolutely. We then opened Delphi and we went and implemented one such procedure. Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the procedures with parameters. As I said, we're going to look at where I declare it and how I define them and how they differ from the ones without parameters. And then we're going to look at the different types of parameters and where they fall in. The names are the formal and the actual parameters, and see how they fit into the scenario. And then we're going to look at a little Delphi project. We're going to implement a procedure with parameters, and if we have time, I will carry on by explaining what method signatures are, and following that, or linked to that actually, are method or is method overloading, and how we can use that in practice. And again, if I do have time, we've been teaching that full 45 minutes just about every day the last couple of days, a week or so. But if there is enough time, I will implement overloading in my existing Delphi project. Otherwise, we'll just carry on tomorrow. Okay, so declaring and defining a procedure with parameters. Now, if you remember from yesterday, a parameter would want, a procedure would want a parameter if it can't do its job without additional information. If it requires additional information, like a show message, if you call this show message procedure, Delphi wants to know, okay, what is the message that you want to send? And that you send via a parameter. And then it takes the parameter and it fulfills its task. It loads the little window and it takes your parameter string and pops it in that window as the message that you want to display. Okay, so a procedure is declared as a method of the form, the same as yesterday. We're going to do it in the private section again. Why? Because we're only going to need to use or call this procedure from within my form. Later on, in grade 12, when you do object orientation, we will take these procedures and put them in the public section so that other forms can access this. Okay, so what's the difference between today and yesterday? Well, it's still procedure, name of procedure, but now in brackets after the procedure name, I declare my parameters as variables. So I would give it a name, parameter 1 of type, and then the type 1, that could be integer or string or real or whatever, followed by, if required, if I need more than one parameter, then I would add the second parameter of its type, and so on, third, fourth, if I require that. So the procedure is defined in the body of the program as follows. So exactly the same as yesterday. Again, the procedure class name.name of procedure followed by those very same parameters. But we know now at least that we can use a shortcut after we've defined or at least declared my procedure. I can just use Control-Shift-C and Delphi creates the definition for us automatically. Okay, so just a quick theory behind formal versus actual parameters. So formal parameters, those are the variables declared in a function or procedure definition. So at the top, under private, where you place parameter, name, colon, type, and so on, those are called your formal parameters. So let's see an example. So set form height. So if I wanted to make a procedure that changes the height of my form in code, I would then call this procedure or define it and then add height as type integer. So it's going to basically reduce the size of the height of my form to this new size over here. And this over here would be my formal parameter. Okay, here's another one. If I wanted to expand on that and not just set the height of the form, but the actual size, the width and the height, I could use formal parameters as in width, comma, height, and they're both of type integer. You don't have to do it this way. You can go width of type integer and then height of type integer, but then sort of splitting the two parameters becomes a semicolon and not a comma. But we will look at an example when we go into Delphi. So that's formal parameters. So that is what we call the parameters that we define in our procedure definition. The actual parameters. Now, this comes in when I actually go and call this procedure from some sort of button or wherever. And those are the values or the variables passed as what they call arguments while we call a function or a procedure in this case. So an example would be, now that I've set up my set form height, I could go to a button and that button may say something like, okay, change height. And then when I change inside the event of change height, I simply now call this method or procedure. And then I add my actual parameter, the actual value that I want it to be. So over here, I used a hard-coded value of 300. You don't have to do that. You can also use variables that store these values. So if I then call set form size, I could also call a variable. So x, comma, y. In other words, the width, comma, the height. Okay. So if there are three formal parameters in the formal parameter list, then the call statement must supply three arguments. That's very important. If you define a procedure over here I've defined it as 1. If I want to now call it, I have to give it one parameter. If I define it with 2, I have to give it 2 parameters. And over here, if it's 3, you have to give it 3 actual parameters. And just to make sure that you understand, these actual parameters, we say we call them as arguments of the procedure. It's not a fight, it's just, I don't know how they call it. The next rule, so first rule is we need to match the number of parameters in our actual call statement than what is there in my formal parameter definition. The second rule is that the data type of each argument value must match the data type of its corresponding formal parameter. If this set form height is an integer, then I have to send an integer as well. I can't send a string. It won't compile, won't run. Again, here, I've got 2 integers, so I have to pass 2 integers. So I'm assuming x and y must be of type integer over here. Otherwise, it won't work. So that's the second very important rule. And lastly, the third rule is the order of the arguments must be in the same order as in the formal parameter list. And I hope that makes logical sense, because how else will Delphi know which order you want? You just got to keep the same order. So x will correspond with width, and y will correspond with height. Okay, so that's just basic jargon. That's how they refer to the different types of parameters. So formal parameters versus actual parameters. These are the formal ones as in the definition, and here are the actual ones when I actually go and call my procedure with values. Right, so I'm going to read a very long 2-sentence, 3-sentence paragraph that defines value parameters. Okay, so a parameter passing by value. Let's read it quickly. So it says there, when a procedure is called, memory locations are created for each of the formal parameters, and the values of the arguments are assigned to the corresponding formal parameters. Changes made to a value parameter will not affect its corresponding argument. When the procedure is exited, the memory locations of the formal parameters die away. Now, who understood a word I read just now? I wouldn't have understood it if somebody read it to me, but okay, so let's break it down into smaller pieces. I'm going to take this exact same paragraph and break it down for you. So let's start. And this is going to hopefully explain how the parameters go from where I call the procedure to where I actually execute my procedure. So when a procedure is called, okay, so that would be the set, form, height, and I send it my argument of 300, let's say. So when this procedure is called, okay, so let's look at this example. So set form size, I've got x as 500 and y as 300, and x carries 500 and y carries 300. And now I call this procedure. What happens? Memory locations are created for each of the formal parameters. Now, the formal parameters, that's in the method itself that I've defined. Now, this piece of code is going to be typically in my little button. That's still my actual parameter call. It then goes to the actual method, and it starts by creating a memory space in RAM for each of the formal parameters. In other words, it's basically defining I height, or declaring I height and I width it was, hey, or the other way around, doesn't matter. So it's as though you are declaring new variables, and the scope of those variables will be local only to that method. Okay, so memory locations at this stage gets created for your formal parameters. So here's the example. So my set form size, I've got an I width and an I height, and immediately at this point, local scope variables are declared as though I width is an integer and I height is an integer. So now those exist suddenly out of nowhere. Then after that, the values of the arguments, okay, 500 and 300, are assigned to the corresponding formal parameters. So my set form size, I width and I height will now actually, after they've been declared, be initialized by receiving the values from x and y. So I width would now be assigned the value of x, and we know that is 500. And I height will be assigned the value of y, which we know is 300. So now my procedure has created these local variables, and they've been assigned with these variables. So now at this stage, these two variables actually have values, and I can now carry on and do my task by executing the implementation code in that procedure. And every single time I reference I width and I height, I would be referencing the value that was called, the 500 and the 300. Okay, now important. Changes made to the value parameter will not affect its corresponding argument. What does that mean? In other words, if in my implementation of this procedure, if for some reason I want to say I width becomes I width divided by 2, in other words, that value of 500 now changes to 250, it doesn't affect or have any effect on the X that was used to call it. X still remains 500. It doesn't change at all from the button's perspective. It's the formal parameters with the value parameters that has been assigned to them that changes, nothing else. And then lastly, when the procedure is exited, so in plain English, when that procedure is done and I go back to the button, to the line that called it, then the memory locations of the formal parameters die away. So at that point, when I exit my procedure, I width and I height cease to exist. They don't exist anymore. It will just be recreated the next time I call this procedure. So hopefully, guys, this explanation makes a lot more sense than the one on the previous page. Any questions? So here's the example. I width and I height is destroyed after set form size XY is completed and done, finishing 12. Okay, so now we're going to do an activity. We're going to draw a square shape, and we're going to start off by creating a procedure that is able to take the size of the square as well as the symbol that will be used to create the square. So for argument's sake, if I, let me just open up a little notepad here. If I want to draw a square of 4 stars, then it would look something like that when I'm done. Okay, because this is notepad, this doesn't look like a square, but I hope you understand what I mean. So if somebody enters 4 over here and a star over there, or an asterisk, and I hit draw square, what I want my procedure, what I want my button to do is to grab these values here and then call a procedure that we're going to create called square, and we're going to pass those values, okay, the size and the symbol, as my actual parameter to the square procedure with the 2 formal parameters, and it's going to execute the code, and hopefully it's going to draw the square on my rich edit over here. So that's what I want to try and do at this stage. Now, this is not the concept of drawing these squares should not be new to you. You should have probably have done something similar in grade 10 when you were introduced to, was it nested loops, nested for loops? Why nested for loops? Because if I want to draw this square over here, I would need to say, okay, I'm going to loop from 1 to size of square, okay, for every single line, okay? So it's going to be 4 times. But then inside there, I'm going to have an inner loop that prints out 1 star at a time. So it's going to be an outer loop, 1 to size, I1 to size, and an inner loop, J1 to size. And I'm just going to simply add this to a string, and at the end of my inner loop, just add that little string of 4 stars if I called for in my reach edit, and just complete the outer loop for every single one of them. That's what I'm going to try and do right now with you. Okay. So let's go to my program that I created, and I need to now first, I guess, create my procedure. So we're going to go to private over here. And remember, if I want to call a procedure, I've got to say procedure. And I give it a name. And then over here, I'm going to say what my parameters are. So I need a size as an integer. So let's call that I size of type integer. And remember, now I'm going to use a semicolon for my C symbol, and I'm going to make it of type, I think it's char, right? Hope so. Okay, so there's my semicolon. So now I have defined my procedure over here. So we're going to go and say Control Shift C, and it creates my definition. So now let's apply that loop. So what do I receive here? What do I have as my procedures parameters? I assume I would have been passed the number in size and the symbol that I'm going to use. So it's pretty simple. I'm going to say, let's declare an S line variable. So S line of type string. And I'm going to start with a for loop. So for I from 1 to I size, whatever that size is. What do I want to do? So what did I just do there? So I'm going to start it again. Okay, and I want to now create an inner loop, but I'm just going to reset my S line to nothing because I don't want that S line to grow. Otherwise, I'm not going to make a square. I'm going to make something like a broken or a step triangle. So I just want to reset that. And then I'm going to say, okay, for not I, but J, 1 to I size again. Why is my Delphi doing this? Okay, so there's the inner loop. So for every single inner loop, so where's my, there, I've got my outer loop and my inner loop. What do I want to do? I want to add a star 4 times to S line. So I'm going to say S line becomes whatever S line was, which is currently nothing, plus my symbol. Okay, so plus my symbol, and that should be it. And at the end of that inner loop, I would have my 4 stars. So now I'm just going to say, I think it was a rich edit. Let's just see what that was. Not sure. It was a red show. Why didn't it come up? Let's try again. So red, oh, there it is. Show.lines.add. And what do I want to do? I want to add line. Okay, so let's just recap here. So I've got my outer loop for my lines. I set my line to 0 or to null, and then, or empty, should I say. And then I have an inner loop for every single star in that line, also from 1 to I size. And for each one, I just add that symbol into my line. At the end of that inner loop, but still in my outer loop, I simply go and display those lines. So that's what we're doing there. So hopefully this is going to work. We can't test it right away. Why? Because I still have to give code for my button. Now the button is the one that's going to collect my data and then call this procedure with my actual values that I received from my edits. So I'm going to have variables here, and I'm going to get some value. What should we call it? Well, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it the same as what this procedure uses. So what does it use here? It uses I size and C symbol. You can call it the same. Why can you call it the same? The reason is because, as we said, the scope of these formal variables or these formal parameters are local. It has died. So I can actually go and use the same name, or I can use something totally different. Which one? Okay, well, let's use the same name. So I size again of type integer, and I'm going to have C symbol of type chop. What is very important, though, is that the names, what you choose, that's not important. The types are very important. It's got to be the same as these types over here. So what I want to do, I want to get the values from my edits. So I'm going to start with I size becomes, and it's going to be an edit size dot text. I need to convert that string into an integer. So I'm going to use the toString command there. Then to get C symbol, I'm going to get edit symbol this time. It's text. Okay, and how do you convert a string to a character? You simply say, what am I doing? I don't want to make it from int to string. I want to make it from string to int. str to int. Apologies for that. Okay, so I've got my string. I've converted it to an int into iSize. How do I take this string and convert it to a character? Well, simple is you just use that whole logic of what is a string in Delphi? A string in Delphi is nothing other than an array of characters. So I'm just going to get the character at the first position of my string. Okay, so now I've got those values. Now I can proceed to call my procedure. What do I call it? I think it was just square. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to call square. Okay, I've got to give it its size. Now I've made it iSize and C symbol. Right? So I'm calling this method. My code will now jump. It will be calling these actual values, whatever it was that the user typed in. So let's assume it was 4 and star. I'm going to be sending the 4 and star through iSize and C symbol as my actual parameters. It's going to jump to this procedure, find it over here, and then give this value and pass it on to iSize after it's been declared locally, and take C symbol and pass it on to C symbol. So that wherever something happens here and I call on one of these parameters, that value of size 4 would then come in here and in there, and this is the symbol that it would fetch from here. So that is the pathway of how my actual parameters are called and transferred through the value parameters into my formal parameters. A lot of jargon, a lot of stuff, but you need to sort of understand it at some level for your theory exams. So let's see how many mistakes I've made today. Okay, so far nothing. So if I say 4 and star, and I draw my square, there it is. If I change that to 6 and an @ sign, and I draw my square, it makes it bigger. Okay, I'm going to clear my rich edit every single time. So where would I do that? Well, I think I'll rather do it inside my button. So the very first thing I'm going to do is say red show.clear. So every time I hit that button, a new shape replaces the older shape. Okay, so that is basically that. So if I now try and run this in debugger mode, so we're going to press this button over here just to show you how everything works. Okay, so it starts off by, well, where it initializes the whole form. So let's step through that. I'm going to use this button and it steps and steps and steps. I'm actually wanted to be in here, and I'm going to step again. Where does it start? Well, it starts off by giving me my form. So now I'm going to add in a value of 5 and a hash, and I'm going to hit draw square. Okay, so that is where everything begins because I've hit my button squares click. So I'm going to step in again. Okay, and where are my variables? Let's just move my comments over here. So currently, let's look at what my variables look like. Currently, I don't have any variables with values really. I've got iSize, but there's no value in there. And I've got C symbol, but there's no value in there yet. Okay, so I'm going to step on. Okay, and after iSize, you'll see now that I've got a value of 5, which is what I want. and my C symbol is now hash. And this is where I call my square method. Now my procedure. Let's see what happens now. Now it needs to jump to this procedure and starts beginning over there. Okay, I now have an I and a J. Okay, and at that point, S line is still nothing. Let's jump one more time. It's funny that the I didn't get a value. S line at this point is empty. And now I'm going to start adding my symbol to S line within my for loop, my inner loop. So there's the first hash, okay, the second hash, the third hash, and the fourth hash. Now I would get to that point where J is now equal to I size, and it's going to exit the for loop, the inner for loop. Right? And oh yes, I made it 5. It's going to do it one more time. And now it's going to exit. Now I want to add my S line, 2 lines, okay? And now it's going to start all over again for the second line over there. S line will now be deleted, well, cleared, and so we carry on. And by the end of this method, when I exit my outer loop, there we go, do it one more time. Fifth time. Okay, there's my fifth one. I add that, and now I jump all the way to the end. Okay, if there was more code in my button, it would have jumped to over here, but it found the end and went all the way to the end. So that is the idea over there. Hope that makes sense, guys, in some level over here. And please use this debugging mode if you have logical errors. And it's always good then to see, how am my variables actually changing? Because if you have a logical error, you get an unexpected result, and it's usually because you're putting the wrong values at the wrong times in the variables. Okay, so that was that part, and we've created now my shape of any size. So the next step is now to discuss method signatures and method overloading. Now, what is a method signature? It says that each method has a method signature. And what is the method signature? Well, it's a combination of 2 things. It is the name of the method, okay, square, and its formal parameter list. Okay, so I had 2 parameters in my formal parameter list. So it's a combination of my name as well as my 2 parameters. And those things together is referred as the method signature of a method. Now, why is that important? Well, you can get more than one method with the same name. Think about the INC procedure. Okay, this is called method overloading, and it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. In method overloading, a procedure is differentiated. In other words, Delphi knows which one you are calling from another procedure by its method signature. Now, the 2 INC variations, the one method signature is INC with 1 parameter, and the second variation is, or the variation to the first one, is INC with 2 parameters. So if you call INC with 1 parameter, Delphi knows that it's going to call the one with a formal list with only the 1 parameter. And that's how it matches the 2. And that's another reason why it's important to have the right, to call the right number of arguments and the right type of arguments, and thirdly, the correct order of your arguments. Okay, so now we have about 10 minutes or so, 10, 11 minutes to expand on our square shape. Now, let's see if we can do that. So what they want us to do is expand the square shape activity to include the following overloaded procedures. So currently I've got square with an I size and a C symbol. They want us now to add in a square without parameters, and that thing is going to just default to 4x4 star shapes. and then the square with one parameter size, which should default to the size that is given with star shapes. Okay, so those two will always print out star shapes. This one 4 and this one whatever the size is that you pass. And what I want to do is I'm going to define these procedures, but I'm going to use the existing code in the procedure that I've already done with the 2 parameters to be called from these two. Because why do I want to reinvent the wheel? Can I already have the code to make a square? I'm going to use that code in these 2 parameters as well. Okay, so you need to follow very, very carefully. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to update my procedure declarations over here. So I'm going to put the default one without the parameters at the top. I don't think it makes a difference. It just makes logical sense to me. So square, okay. And underneath that, I'm going to say procedure square with I size as type integer. Right. Now, in Delphi, whenever you overload your methods, you need to provide it with a specific statement to tell Delphi, this is your intention, this is not a mistake. So we use the command overload behind every single one of these overloaded methods. So I'm going to just type in overload over there and overload there and overload over here. So now I've got my methods available. Next step is that where I implement my procedures. What's that shortcut again? Control Shift C. And it gives me a problem. Did I do something wrong here somewhere? Let's try again. Control Shift C. My Delphi is acting up a bit. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry, I didn't see that. So it created my square with my one parameter, formal parameter, and the square without it. Okay, you can always cut and paste that and put it in the correct positions wherever you want to. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so I want to now create a square of size whatever is passed to me, but as star. So all I'm going to do now in this line, and this is how simple it becomes, I'm going to simply call my square with the 2 parameters. So I'm going to say square, okay, what's the size I'm going to pass it? I'm going to pass it as the size that is passed on me when my procedure over here is called into I size, okay? So it's going to be square. I'm going to call I size. And what is my symbol? Well, I'm going to have to tell it now. And I think we said it's going to be a star. Okay, so that defaults to star because I didn't tell it which symbol to do. And this one over here, I have no additional information. So I'm going to call square of size 4 and star. Right, and that's it. I've expanded my procedures with overloading. Now I just need to be able to call them from my button as well. Okay, so if I go back to my design, and this is why I said in my form optional settings. So what the idea is here is if I press the button, I want to check if those are empty. If both of them are empty, then I want to call the square without any parameters. If the square is empty, okay, then I'm going to call the one with the 2 parameters, but I'm going to send 4 to it and this symbol over here. The other way around, if this one's empty, I want to send the size and my star. And if both of them have values in like we've done, it's going to just default to the one with the 2 parameters and display whatever it is that the person wants in terms of size and character. So I need to first test if those things are empty or not. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my button over here. Okay, and I want to test if they are empty. And I'm going to use two Boolean variables to store them as flags just to make my code neater for myself. So I'm going to create two Boolean variables. I'm going to say B is size empty, okay, and B is symbol empty, and that is type Boolean, okay. And maybe over here somewhere, I want to say, okay, how should we do this? I want to check if my edit size is empty. So I'm going to say, all right, in B is, what am I doing here? Why is it not coming up? Let's just save everything. I'm going to say B is size empty. I don't know why I have to do that. Okay, I'm going to say becomes, and I'm going to give it an expression because this thing over here needs to store true or false. And the expression I'm going to give it is if, well, you're not going to say the if, but I'm just going to say edit size dot text if that is empty, like that. So if it is empty, the expression is going to be true, and true is going to be stored into B is size empty. Okay, just want to check if this thing still runs. Okay, it does still run. I wonder why my auto invoke isn't working. So let's try again. Oh, there we go. So if B is simple empty, I'm going to do the same with the other one. I'm going to say, okay, edit dot text. Okay, if that is returned from the edit is also empty, then this statement is going to be true, and I'm going to store it in my Boolean flag. You don't have to code this way, but you will find that sometimes it is useful and it makes your if statements correct. Okay, so a bit of defensive programming here. If I don't type something into an edit and I try and make that over here, I'm going to get a runtime error. Let me show you what I mean. If I run my program and I don't put anything in there and I hit my button, it says, whoops, that over there, that emptiness is not a valid integer value. So I've got to do a check first. So I want to say, if this is not empty, then only will I do this statement. Okay, so now I can say if, okay, not, and what am I going to do? I can just call my size is empty. So I'm saying if not true, in other words, if it's not empty, in other words, if there's something in there, then I want to grab it, convert it to an int, and then make it my size. We just got to do that then over there. And then the same with a symbol. If I run the symbol, it's going to want to get the first character, but there's nothing in there if it's empty, and that's also going to cause a runtime error. So I'm going to add if not B, what's the other one? Symbol, not empty. Then what? Only then grab my edit symbol. What did I do here now? So C symbol, I think. Okay, just to recap, I'm saying if it's not empty, then grab that first character from the edit and store it into C symbol. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so now that I've got my values or not, okay, I'm going to have to start my if statements here. I literally have a couple of minutes left. Okay, let's see if I can do that quickly. So first I'm going to say if not, that is empty. Okay, if that is not empty, no, let's not do the not. I want to check if both of my edits have been entered in. Okay, so I'm saying if B size empty and B symbol empty. Okay, so if both of them are empty, what do I want to call? Think about that. Okay, then I just want to call the square without any parameters because both of them are empty. Okay, then else if, what should the next one be? So let's say my symbol is empty. Okay, so if it's not one of those, then we say, okay, well, if at least the symbol is empty, what am I going to call? Okay, I'm going to call the square with the size only because I don't have and that is I size over there. Okay, now what is the next one? If that's not the case, but my size is empty, which one am I going to call? I'm now going to call my square. The size was empty, so I'm going to give it a default value of 4 because I didn't create a fourth overloaded version of it. But I know what my symbol is because my symbol isn't empty, so I'm going to send C symbol to that as well. Okay, and then finally, okay, else, well, what is the only thing that remains? The only possibility that remains is that they are both empty. Not empty, but both filled in with values. So I know what that's going to be. It's going to be I size, comma, C symbol. And hopefully that will work now. So I'm not going to call this anymore. And I'm just going to simply run my program. So let's see if this works. If I don't put anything in, what's going to happen? I'm going to call my default. If I put in a value of 6 with nothing there, I have an error. Guys, let me do the following. Okay, I think we've gone through the code. There's going to be a little syntax issue here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop it for now. And when we start tomorrow with my functions, just before that, I'm going to see what I just did wrong with my procedures, and we're going to go correct that, finish the explanation of what I've done, and then start on with functions. And we're going to declare them, define them. We're going to do both functions with and without parameters, and I'm going to explain the difference that a function has over a procedure, the actual function return types. Guys, there's my link that you can get all the textbooks from, and we do a lot of our activities from. Please go there, download the textbooks and the data files and use it. It is free. Have a lovely day.